Hello and welcome to The Critique. Today, we're looking at a script for a YouTube political commentary video. It's called The Average Liberal Has an IQ of 7, maybe.
Yeah.
The author wants to make the commentary more rhetorically robust, move it beyond just, preaching to the choir.
Right.
So let's just get right to work.
Let's do it.
So I want to start with the overall structure, the architecture of the piece. He calls it the weave.
The weave, right.
And look, the intentional use of this meandering style, where you're kind of looping in and out of topics, it's risky. It can confuse the audience way more than it impresses them.
So the weave, we hear that a lot, usually in reference to Donald Trump's speaking style. For anyone listening who isn't familiar, how would you define it here? It's basically nonlinear story. So you open a topic, then you drift into a little sidebar, then you open a third topic. And the idea is that you'll eventually circle back and tie it all together.
When it works, it feels brilliant.
Exactly. It's like a jazz solo, but when it fails, it just sounds like someone reading their browser history out loud.
And the author here is, explicitly trying to do that?
Oh, yeah. He even comments on it in the text. He says things like, I'm doing the weave, You think he's going all the way over here, and then he makes his point eventually. It's a very bold choice.
Okay.
But here's the weak. While he says it's strategic, the actual connections between the parts, the IQ Google search, the bucket hat guy, the Starbucks story, they feel kind of accidental, not engineered.
So you're left wondering, is this on purpose, or is it just a little messy?
Precisely. Like there's this one transition where he's talking about Kamala Harris, and then boom, we're suddenly watching a clip about an ICE facility. There's no thematic bridge there. It feels like you just changed the channel.
And that breaks the trust you need for that style to work.
It completely breaks it. So my suggestion is to use really clear, really explicit thematic signposts. You have to tell the audience why you're taking a detour before you take. You got to hold their hand.
Okay, so let's get concrete. That Starbucks anecdote, it really does feel like it comes out of nowhere.
It really does. He jumps from reacting to this screaming bucket hat guy straight to, I was at a local coffee shop. It's jarring.
So what's the fix?
It's simple. You just add a sentence to connect them. Before you start the story, you say something like, I saw this exact same disconnect from reality that we just saw in that bucket hat guy when I was getting coffee.
Okay. So you frame the story as evidence for the last point, not just a random thing that happened.
Exactly. It turns the tangent into a supporting pillar. And while we're on that, we need to talk about the details within the weave. He goes off about his office setup, his wife figuring things out.
Yeah, the logistics.
Right. To tighten the weave, I just cut all that. Does knowing about his desk help prove the mammification of New York argument?
No.
No, it's just friction. If a thread isn't holding any weight, you just have to cut it.
Every thread has to pull tight. Makes sense. Okay. Let's move to the arguments themselves. He leans really heavily on the intelligence of his opponents.
He does, and that's the second big point. Relying so heavily on this specific, repetitive hyperbole about IQ, it actually reduces your persuasive authority. It limits your audience to people who already agree with you.
You mean the numbers? The IQ of 7 from the title?
That, and it's all through the script. The opposition has an IQ of 4, 7, 0, or they're like a rock, or a jellyfish, or a seahorse.
Right. Now, I can hear the author saying, hey, it's just comedy. It's satire. I'm just having fun. What's the actual downside to doing that?
The weakness is that, first, it gets old. It loses its punch. But more importantly, it totally undermines your own claim to being logical.
How so?
Because if you frame your opponents as biologically incapable of thought, like a seahorse, you don't have to actually engage with or debunk their arguments.
I see what you're saying. If I just say my opponent is a rock, I don't have to explain why their tax policy is flawed.
Exactly. Because rocks don't have tax policies. And if your goal is robustness, this is the opposite of that. It's a shortcut. The suggestion is to replace the raw insults with a deconstruction of specific contradictions. Show us why they're wrong. Don't just tell us they're stupid.
Okay, I like that. And we can actually use the material that's already in the script to do this. That woman in Starbucks, for instance.
The renegade archetype, yes. This is a gold mine that he's not really using. He just dismisses her as having a low IQ. But look at the actual contradiction he observed.
She's this wealthy, very polite woman in a fancy coffee shop.
Who is also advocating for harassing federal agents. That's the interesting part.
That dissonance, yeah. The polite exterior and the radical interior.
Right. So lean into that. Instead of just calling her stupid, contrast her demeanor. Her face lighting up like a happy holiday tree, with the aggressive action of standing between ICE agents and illegal immigrants.
So the commentary becomes about that paradox.
Exactly. You could say something like, look at how she politely sips her latte and smiles like a grandmother, while at the same time she's advocating for total anarchy. That is so much more sophisticated than just saying her IQ is 4.
It feels more robust, for sure. It turns it from a playground insult into a real observation. Let's stick with that Starbucks story, though, and look at how it's told.
Yes. My next point is that the central anecdote about the New York couple has these really vivid details, but it buries the lead and just kills the tension.
Bearing the lead, so it just takes too long to get to the point?
Way too long. We spend all this time on the setup. The narrator says he's nosy, he justifies being at a Starbucks because basic. He talks about his office again. And then there's this whole preamble about Mom Donnie and a scavenger hunt.
I have to admit, I got a little lost on the scavenger hunt part. I wasn't sure if that was a metaphor or a real thing.
Exactly. The listener's attention is just gone. By the time we get to the actual conflict, her views on ICE, the energy has totally evaporated. The weakness is just clutter.
So the suggestion is to streamline it.
Get to the conflict fast. Maximize the impact.
So give me a concrete example. What stays, what goes?
Okay, I would just compress that whole intro. We don't need to know why he's basic. We don't need the scavenger hunt. Just get right to it. I met a couple from New York, polite, well-dressed, and then she told me who she supports. Boom, you're in the conflict.
Keeps the energy way up. And what about her dialogue? There's that really strong imagery she uses about rodents.
That is the absolute key. She says something about human beings crawling on the floor versus rodent. That is powerful, it's disturbing, it makes his whole point for him.
But he kind of steps on it.
He totally steps on his own punchline. He immediately jumps in to say she's crazy or talks about how her husband is embarrassed. My advice is to just isolate that quote. Let it be the centerpiece.
Let it breathe.
Let it hang in the air. She looked me right in the eye and said, "We don't have rodents. We have human beings crawling on the floor." Just pause. Let that sink in. She indicts herself with her own words. You don't have to scream it at the audience.
That's way more confident. It's showing, not telling.
Exactly. Which is always more persuasive.
Okay, I want to shift gears to the end of the script because it makes this big pivot into a spiritual worldview, and it's pretty sudden.
That's the last and maybe the most critical point. The pivot from this aggressive political mockery to a really sincere spiritual plea. It creates a tonal whiplash that I think could alienate the audience right when the argument gets most important.
It's a huge contrast. We go from jokes about seahorses and scamala right into darkness and light and spiritual bankruptcy.
And personal pain. The weakness is that the humor in the first half is really caustic. It's all mockery. And that just undercuts the gravity of the second half. If you spend 10 minutes calling people idiots, it's very hard to suddenly turn around and say, we need to pray for them because they're lost in dark.
It can sound like a tactic, not a real belief.
It risks feeling disingenuous. Yeah, the audience might think, wait, is this another joke? Is this a bit? So the suggestion is to create a dedicated bridge segment. You have to signal to the audience that the tone is about to change.
What does that bridge sound like?
After the last joke about a seahorse or whatever, he needs to pause, a literal pause, and then say something like, but listen, I joke about the IQ, but in all seriousness, the reason this is tragic, not just funny, is because I think we're dealing with a real spiritual blind.
Okay. That resets the room.
It does. It tells the audience, okay, comedy set's over, now I'm speaking from the heart. And that leads right into the most powerful part of the whole script, which is the mention of his brother.
The brother who doesn't speak to him anymore, that felt very real. It was like the only moment of real vulnerability in the whole thing.
It's the emotional core of the piece. But right now, it comes so late and it's all tangled up with the theology. So my advice is to use that personal stake earlier, or at least weave it in more gently.
And how do you do that without it feeling like just another partisan point?
You change the delivery. The aggression has to vanish. It needs to sound like a lament. I've lost my brother to this. I miss him, and that's why I see this as darkness. That humanizes him. It earns him the right to make the spiritual argument.
That's a great point. But I could see a counter-argument. He's writing for an audience that loves the red meat, right? They love the insults. Is there a risk that if he softens up, he loses that audience?
That's a fair question. And yes, they do love the mockery. But if the goal is robustness and impact, you have to risk softening the edge to let the truth come through. If you're going to preach about light, you have to show some light. You can't just be the darkness of mockery and then try to claim the moral high ground. The bridge lets you do both.
So it elevates it from just a rant to more of a testimony.
Exactly. It seems like the author has all the right ingredients. He just needs to adjust the recipe a little bit.
Well, this has been really thorough. Let's recap the main action items for Tinashe.
Sounds good. So first, the we. The action item is to make every tangent explicitly link back to the main point, with clear signposting.
Okay.
Second,
Second,
Argumentation. Trade the IQ insults for exposing contradiction. Use that woman's own behavior to prove your point instead of just calling her name. It's just smarter.
and the anecdote?
Streamline it. Cut the fluff about being basic or the scavenger. Get to the conflict and let that powerful dialogue about rodents stand on its own.
And finally, the tone.
Bridge the gap. You cannot jump from seahorse jokes to spiritual bankruptcy without a turn signal. Acknowledge the shift and let that personal story about your brother carry the real emotional weight.
Tinashe, Peter, thank you for sending this in. There's a ton of raw energy and a clear voice here. But some of these structural tweaks, it could be really compelling, not just entertaining, but actually persuasive. We would love to see a revised draft.
Absolutely. It's a bold piece. With a bit more discipline, it'll be a strong one. Good luck.
That's it for this critique. Until next time, keep writing.